listening to the Valley Current.
Welcome into the Valley Current. I'm so happy here today to be podcasting and broadcasting. What is it called? Facebook casting now when we do it on Facebook. I mean, I've got a great guest who you've all met before, but he's coming in right before the Thanksgiving holiday to talk about how we should all be giving back to the community, because Andrew has done a wonderful job at HireKey in making more than just money for various people. And I like to laugh when we talk about this because it's such a bigger thing what Silicon Valley is, and it's very much more of a brand these days than just a geographic area, although it seems to be expanding further north and further south. So welcome in, Andrew.
Thank you, Jack.
And thanks for making the time before Thanksgiving. I know it gets very busy, and we've been talking about doing this for a long time because you so kindly invited me to one of your events where you bring in all these veterans, and I wanted to spend some time talking about how you and HireKey promote this pro bono effort, which, of course, as lawyers, we do pro bono, and we do it, and we don't really talk about it, but we do it, and we should talk about it, and we should extend that gracious idea of giving back to the community, and you do it, and you do it really well. So why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Thank you, Jack. Without going into a lot of detail, it's something my partner and I got passionate about. It's a very underutilized, underleveraged asset, veterans as employees. And
as a talent pool.
Right,
yes.
as a resource. And more to the point, I've never sat down with one of my clients and said, what are you doing on the diversity and inclusion piece for the veterans? And they say, oh my God, that's a dumb idea. We don't need your help with that. All of the employers are very interested in finding a legitimate kind of effective way to tap into that resource. So it's opened a lot of doors, and
right.
It is the right thing to do, to your point.
Well, it's the right thing to do, and oddly, we're in such a shrinkage of available talent that you would think that anyone that's been through training of the military would be like an ideal candidate for some of the more challenging positions that exist, and yet it seems that employers are not really well connected enough, and maybe that's a failing of government. I mean, do you look at it in part as a failing of government?
Yes and no. I think the real stumbling block is the disconnect. In other words, veterans aren't good at getting jobs. There's something called an MOS, your military occupational skill, and you have a code. I'm making this up, but like if you're the military police, you're a C-14. And so what does that translate to civilian duties and responsibilities? Right. And it doesn't. So because veterans don't really know how to transcribe their skill sets, and more to the point, employers don't know how to interpret the MOS, they just go like this. So it's kind of the blind leading the blind. So I don't think really it's through lack of effort or care. It's really kind of a strategic thing.
Yeah, but you would think that given that we've been through at least a couple of world wars, maybe some people would say, I've heard some people say, for example, the Civil War never ended, in sort of a hyperbolic way to say we're still fighting the race issue, we're still fighting the North versus the South. This is funny because remember, 1865 is over 150 years ago, 160 years ago soon. It's a long time. And, I want to drop a footnote here because it reminds me that the President of the United States that declared the national Thanksgiving holiday was Abraham Lincoln.
Really?
In 1863.
Jack, I love that
yes.
You know that.
I know. It's amazing. I remember that fact probably from grade school. And what he did is he was trying to unite the North and the South and end the war early by saying we're going to have a national harvest-type festival, because up to that point, the states all had different days because harvests happen at different times of the year. North is different from South, East is different from West. So Lincoln said, we're going to have a national holiday. It's going to be on a Thursday. I don't think he declared on Friday you'll have off as well. I think he just said it's not going to be, like a Saturday or a Sunday. It's going to be on a Thursday, and it's going to be the same day every year, which it's been now traditionally since 1863 in November. with a view that we're going to unify the country. Of course, it didn't actually work. The war continued. Yes, there was a holiday. Yes, it was a national holiday, but fundamentally, it didn't cause what he really envisioned. Maybe it'll bring peace. Maybe we'll have a day of ceasefire, in effect. It didn't really work out that way. But the point is, it's become this event where people all of a sudden get really nice, including lawyers, including opposing lawyers. So what I want to tie that to is, given that we have 150 or more years of this holiday and 150 more years of military type, actions, why hasn't there been some better evolution on making the transition out of the military into civilian life easier, better, more seamless, more automated, and more appropriate to the skill set? It seems like a failing.
Well, and you're right. So it is. And I'm happy to report that there are a lot of companies and people that are actively trying to bridge that gap and facilitate.
Yes.
There's a company called PurePost, and they've done a marvelous job of transcribing the MOS to civilian job descriptions. And ideally, here's what I intend to do, and you heard it here first, is I'm working with a company called Eightfold and Comcast, and they are going to launch this jobs on demand component, the voice activated, voice on command, where I say, show me Stanford football, and it pulls up so if I say,
on
show
your TV,
me, on your TV.
Comcast is in the TV business. The TV is not dead yet, as much as people think it is. But they've got this great search way using audio to find things so you're not clicking away.
Right.
I mean, if you ever see Apple, they're so backwards, you have to type in and you can't get it right. I mean, if Jobs were alive, he would have killed Apple TV until they fixed it. But they've got this voice thing, which is very convenient. So tell us what they're doing with that.
Well, that's kind of an aside. What they also have, Jack, is they have access to all this data. Comcast, if you're a Comcast subscriber, either internet or television, they have a box, and it says Andrew Gardiner lives in Menlo Park. He's 57 years old. He watches a lot of football.
Right.
And so
they got huge data.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what they're intending to do in partnering with Eightfold is creating this database. I forget the number, but I think it's 126,000 veterans in the greater Bay Area.
Okay. And
if they can capture that data and then run it through that Eightfold platform, which is the artificial intelligence that if I gave you a database and I plugged your LinkedIn profile and said, show me the 10 closest profiles to Jack.
Yes.
So if I do that with veterans, I've had no less than a dozen TA thought leaders say, Andrew, if you gave me a database of 126,000 pre-qualified, pre-vetted vets, I would. So that's kind of what the end game is.
Now, these are not unemployed vets. These are vets who are watching Comcast.
Correct.
And some, maybe half of which, are unhappy with their job. Someone told me recently, and I sort of said, really? And they said, yeah, half of the people at work are looking for a new job.
Oh, yeah.
Half of the people are unhappy with what they do, and so they're actively entertaining calls from headhunters, from LinkedIn contacts, from whatever. And Eightfold is a separate company that I think did get some venture capital, right? They're separate and they're up and running. I think the CEO I remember seeing his book. He wrote a book that talks about, it's almost a spiritual sort of way he's putting it, that there's 8 ways to look at the way your career can match your human potential, which can match your work potential. And if you get all this stuff aligned, you're really happy at work, you're really happy in life, you're really happy at what you do. And it's a new way of looking at the modern employee wanting to come to work, enjoying coming to work, enjoying what he or she is doing as part of a team, as part of a mission. It's kind of like what you want to do at HireKey to make things really work for yourself. And this pro bono effort is a big part of it, because you're devoting a big part of your time. You did an actual event on this. You set up a whole event for this, right?
As long as to your earlier comment, no one's really moving the needle. Everybody talks about it. A lot of government funded, or if you're a government contractor, you have mandates. There's compliance issues. I have to prove to you, if I'm going to get more money from the government, that I at least tried to hire 20% of my workforce as veterans, or some modicum of that.
Right.
But I want to go back to something you said, which is really important that will help facilitate bridging the gap of veterans getting to civilian jobs is what Eightfold's doing is they're starting to map and chart out. Okay, so Jack was a C-34 in the Air Force, so
right.
All the C-34s now are semiconductor engineers. So
right.
that lets me know if I'm a C-34, I don't necessarily just have to be a FedEx driver or a Walmart manager. I could be what Jack's doing because my skills in the military transferred to this occupation
right.
and this occupation. So Eightfold's kind of mapping that out, saying, okay, if you're transitioning from the military to civilian, these are what all the other guys that did what you did in the military are doing now,
right.
successfully and
yes.
happily.
Yes.
And they're mapping that out, so it kind of gives you a roadmap, if you will, and that's part of it. I think that's a big part.
Well, it's a huge part of it. You're just saying they've automated what is often a very difficult challenge, which is what's going to make this guy or gal. Both, because I guess there are a lot of women in the military. Let me bite my tongue. I mean, basically, what's going to make them happy and extend their human potential in a way that's going to keep them on the job? Because the other statistic I heard is that the turnover is now down to about 2 to 3 years. People don't even stay for full vesting of their 4-year vesting. Their view is, well, I made the 1-year cliff. Let's put a little bit of corporate law into this, which is the typical stock option grant in venture capital, whether a private company or public company, is a 4-year, sometimes even a 5-year grant, with the first year with a cliff, which means if you don't stay for at least 366 days, you lose 25% of what could have been your wealth creation at the job. So people are staying like to the 50% or maybe to 75%, and then they're like, I'm going to diversify and go to another startup. And you look at them saying, but you could have maybe, gotten a promotion and gotten, additional options and, led a team and took on more responsibility. Like, yeah, I'll just do that in a new startup and I'll diversify. I don't want just Google or just Apple stock anymore. I want to have all kinds of stock. And I've seen some people who literally are proud of, they've got like 15 different jobs that they've done over like a 22-year career. And I say, is that good? And they said, well, it gave me a lot of diversification. Here I am. Now, maybe had they stayed they don't really do the analysis backwards. Maybe had they stayed, but they're like, hey, it's so random whether you're going to succeed or not. So if you can get a person that comes out of the military that put in a good 4 years or a good 3 years, you might actually be able to keep them on the job, which is a really positive thing.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because what I'm noticing is employers, it was, to your point, always about retention. We want you to stay here.
Yes.
It's the cost of hiring you and bringing you in here was X, so we want to leverage that asset. Well, now what employers are doing is they're realizing, hey, Jack's probably only going to be here for 2 years or 3 years, so we're going to make darn sure that 2 or 3 years Jack's here are the most positive, productive, happy years of his life.
Right.
So when Jack leaves, not if Jack leaves.
Yes.
So when Jack leaves, Jack's going to tell everybody, gosh, I really loved it at Eightfold or Google or wherever I was. I learned this, and this, and I brought it to bear at this next job. And so that's basically good publicity. But the point I bring forth is employers are starting to realize, hey, it's not like it used to be where I worked at, like my dad worked at Macy's for, 40 years.
Gosh, your dad was the traditional guy, right?
Well, but that's what a lot of us did. I mean,
he stayed in the same house before, and he stayed married for like 60 years too. Right? He's getting a little older, so we won't. I mean, I hope he's well. I know your mom and dad are like the classic East Coasters who make their way west, young man, west, and they do really well with the same employer and with the same house.
But that dog doesn't hunt anymore. No,
doesn't
it doesn't
exist anymore.
And so it's just. By the way, the Silicon Valley is its own ecosystem with regard to employment.
Yes.
We really. I read a couple of months ago that unemployment is at the lowest it's ever been historically.
Yes.
And that's remarkable.
Right.
That is not insignificant.
Right. And it's an interesting thing too, because I hear these stories that just shock the hell out of me. People who are paid really well, and all of a sudden you lose them. And I'm on the board of several companies, and they're like, we're shocked this guy or gal left. They were doing really well. They were making big bucks. Their options were all vesting, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, yeah, I got this better offer outside of Silicon Valley where the cost of living is like 1/2 or 1/3. And I moved up to Oregon, or I moved up to a no-tax state like the state of Washington or the state of Texas, or in some cases even Florida, like shockingly. Florida, that's like a very, very, right-wing kind of state. But they're like, hey, there's no taxes, and it's a different lifestyle, and, I'm sort of like Silicon Valley is just a little too expensive. And the only reason I bring that up is with 126,000 veterans, and Comcast is really, in California, and Comcast is really a national system. Yes. So I assume this is like a pilot test for them?
Well,
is that what
so
they're doing?
Me back up. Yeah. I'm probably talking out of school here.
Tell us.
Well, there's some data privacy issues. Comcast hasn't sorted it all out, and we're still trying to. I think they're going to ask these veterans to opt in and release their data. But if
it works,
if it works, that would be a phenomenal asset to have a database of 126,000 vets, all their MOS classifications. How do they transfer, and what are all the other MOS people currently doing, and then mapping that out so there's some reason and rhyme to what because what the military doesn't do, it sure teaches you discipline, it teaches you accountability, following orders, all this really important stuff. They don't teach you how to look for a job.
Okay.
They don't teach you how to advocate for yourself. In the military, if I want your opinion, I'll give it to you.
Yes.
So, to really help facilitate the transition from the military to civilian, that type of information data dump would be incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm. And I think the military, probably less than any other serious organization, doesn't do a great job at individualizing people's various skills. Like if you're in the military, you got to sort of blend in to the team. The team kind of trumps the individual. Occasionally there'll be individuals that sort of, push the envelope and maybe they become leaders or they get kicked out, right? But as a general proposition, in Silicon Valley, people are eventually looking for the mavericks that are going to kind of break, what's this Facebook thing, break things fast or move fast and break things. That's a sort of concept of we're only going to create something new, different, and valuable if we destroy a lot of the old inertia things that are in the way.
Right.
The military doesn't operate from that principle. They operate more from use tradition, go traditionally, stay within your swim lane. And so that's an interesting sort of task for Eightfold with the Comcast data. Assume they could pull it off. Assume all the lawyers check all the boxes and they make it all work. Because they're going to learn a lot about what works and doesn't work that they could extend then out of the military and towards, hey, how can we use this to match people that are getting out of graduate school programs, people that have postdocs, because even that transition, different set of institutions, they need to sort of take advantage of the potential that exists. And right now, there's a lot of gaps and there's a lot of failures.
Oh, my God. Where are the cameras?
Yes.
Jack, so what you just touched on, so that's the other thing that Eightfold is doing that I think is very intelligent. So a big hot button is candidate experience. I submit my resume to a company and I don't hear back. I don't even get a, hey, thanks, we'll be in touch. I hear nothing. It's a black hole. Well, what Eightfold's doing is you apply for a job and it says, okay, you know what, Jack, you'd be perfect, but you don't know Python and you don't know Java. If you add these two skill sets to your background, we'll hire you straight away. Here's a link and how you can get set up. So it almost makes hey, these guys really care. Not only did they get back to me, they coached me up and they gave me positive feedback. So that's just for civilian jobs. Imagine if we brought that to bear for the veteran hiring initiatives. That would be incredibly powerful.
And that whole idea of lifelong learning is continuing and in a very relatively inexpensive way. When I was a kid, as I grew up, it was always you had to go into some formal program, whether it was graduate school or doctoral program or postdoc. It was always, hey, an expensive application process, an expensive, getting the books, getting the right courses, it's a whole big process. And today, it's more like, oh, you want to put in the next 100 hours studying Java? we'll line up a playlist for you, and you're off to the races if you apply yourself. We'll give you access to tutors. We'll give you access to people. If you really even want to meet up physically, we'll do that too. But most people are like, hey, I'm going to slam 30 to 50 minutes in every night. And all of a sudden, you got people that transform themselves.
That's right.
Just in their garage or in their, sort of study room, wherever that is. And so life is changing. And more I say to people, and I say this to kids, I say this to parents, start a 529 plan for yourself. Do a smart thing. That's a federal Internal Revenue Code section educational plan. You could put money in. The money's not deductible going in, but all of the gain is tax-free. So if you add a little bit of money every week or month, even $100 to it, over time it gets invested into a fund. All of that is tax-free, so if you decide to do educational things, you could take that money out. Tying that into an eightfold/Comcast system and showing these vets that you can fund this re-education process, that's a big idea, and even that doesn't get well publicized.
No.
Isn't that an amazing thing?
It's fascinating that you bring that, because I have a couple of 529 plans for my kids.
Yes, for your kids, right?
Yeah.
But you need one for yourself, because you're going to be... you're not yet in your 50s. When you get there, you'll realize, well, yeah, I've got to study some stuff and get sort of better at doing certain things. Even organizing this podcast and all this equipment and all the stuff, it was a learning process, man. I mean, setting up this booth, we had this back room at the office that everyone was like keeping files in. I said, that's a perfect size for a radio booth. And people are like, radio booth? What's a lawyer doing? A broadcasting? This is the future. This is like having an amplifier. You want to do this. It's a smart thing to do.
Well, and we've talked about this. What I love about you and this environment is people want to digest. Like I just learned 12 things that I wouldn't have heard if I didn't listen to this podcast. From the 529 thing to Eightfold to Comcast to veterans to MOS. People want to digest this in their car.
Right.
And you're creating a forum and an environment where people can... And listen, I want to... Before we close, I know we're short on time.
Yes.
I want to ask you a question. So you did a lot of formal education.
Yes, I did.
Yes. So looking back...
Contrary to my parents.
Right.
My mom's still alive. Mom, if you're listening, no disrespect. She's like... it was a wartime. I couldn't finish high school. I need to go to work. Well, she went to work when she was a kid. She was probably 14. It was during World War II.
Right. So knowing everything you know and everything that you did, which is a lot, if you can see behind
we got all
the jacket,
we got all the diplomas hanging.
More degrees than a thermometer.
I have to do this because I put this... Whenever you make a point, you have to have like a little sound effect these days, right?
But it used to be if I wanted to learn how to make shoes, I'd go find the village cobbler and I'd say, listen, I want to learn your craft. I will shadow you.
Right.
And so you didn't really do that formally.
Right.
Knowing what you know now, would you have done anything differently? I mean,
Boy, it's a good question. It's apropos to something I've been thinking about. I used to be a mega bike rider. I told this story recently to Joe Kuchera, over on his podcast, which is a great podcast about real estate radio live, RE Radio Live. And, he does a great show, and I often join him on that show. And I said, my wife and I were talking the other night about what were your happiest moments? And I said, I remember when I was working through graduate school in New York, riding my bike from Flatbush, Brooklyn, over the Brooklyn Bridge, uptown to 42nd Street to the computer center where I had classes in graduate school, and then uptown further to 81st Street and 2nd Avenue, all by 3-speed Raleigh bike.
Nice. LTD 3-speed.
Exactly. I mean, the bike was such a workhorse.
I love those bikes.
And Joe was like, how long did it take? And I said, I think I used to do it under an hour, which was pretty good to 42nd Street, and then under a half hour to 81st Street. And I said, I used to feel like that 3 hours, both going and coming, so round trip, it only added maybe an hour total of additional time if I had taken the train, but the exercise, I was so thin and so well buffed. So I actually went out and bought myself a 3-speed Raleigh. Good. All of $50 used. It was worth the $50. And now I've been riding to work, and I said to Joe, my goal is maybe to actually take that bike to Los Gatos. So to answer your question, the only thing I regret is the studying does over time, and the life as a lawyer does definitely over time, create this more sedentary lifestyle. So if I had to do it all over again, I would either be so wrapped into the biking, and it doesn't take an expensive bike, it just takes the discipline. You have to get out of bed, put on those biking shoes. I don't even wear biking shoes, but these people get all dressed up with the biking clothes and the shoes. Some of my friends have these $15,000 bikes. They laugh at me. They're like, are you a porp or what? I said, I just don't want my bike stolen, man. You can't have a big enough lock on some of these bikes. So the point I'm making is, if I had to do it all over again, and I don't want this to sound like it should go in my obituary, but I would say this: you have to build exercise into your life every day, because if you can keep, and you've been really thin, you play a lot of tennis, you look great. And, if you can keep that high school / early college athletic self into your 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and even 70s, and ideally into your 80s, and if you're planning on living to 100, you're going to have to do it into your 90s. And you don't get to this point where you're really just slowly dying in that last 10, 15 years. You're not living life well. That's the one thing I would spend a lot more time making time for. And a lot of people don't do that. They don't make time to put themselves and what makes them happy first. So if I had to do it all over again, I would be totally into planning where I lived versus where I work, so it was the right bike distance, making sure that, the bike was sort of given priority, because I would love to get back to that state of mind I had when I was in graduate school. This goes back now, God, is it 50 years? It's probably going on 40-something years, where in my early 20s, before law school even, I'm in this graduate program. I've got the bachelor's degree. I'm headed towards the master's degree. Maybe I'm going to do this PhD. Maybe not. It kind of depends on, am I going to go to law school instead? But biking to and from that computer center to classes to the work office was a big part of my life. And it made for a lot of happiness daily. Now, you felt like you're in perfect physical condition. So that's sort of a point of, how do you put yourself first and put both your health and sort of what the day feels like. Even today, I did bike today, and I did feel like, I'm really sensing just the environment pre-Thanksgiving with a lot of people smiling. You wouldn't see that in a car, because it's only that you're up waiting for a light to change. You're next to someone who's a pedestrian, and he or she smiles at you, and it's that time of year, man. Nice. People are happy. Nice. And it's a good way to come to work, because you start to feel like you're part of a community, and you are interacting with people, and you're not just a car that's going into a parking lot or parking garage. I mean, think about that. If you had to drive to San Francisco and go through the traffic and then get into a garage. So that's the one thing that I would say. But let me just say, I want to applaud you. So tell us a little bit about how people can reach you at HireKey, HireKey.com, right? But tell us what you do there and kind of how they can reach you. If they're a vet, how they can reach you, and if they're an employer, how they can reach you.
Yeah, just LinkedIn, Andrew Gardiner, Gardiner. I'm very interested in connecting with like-minded people, and then my email address is andrew@thehirekey, TheHirekey.com. Happy to connect with anybody that's passionate about hiring or veterans or anything that we've talked about today.
And Andrew is so well networked. If you're an employer and you need talent, Andrew is absolutely the person. He can give you ideas you won't see. He has resources that you don't have. He has technology. I mean, I know this because I've used Andrew, and he's just done some amazing things. And I think at the end of the day, having Andrew on your team and having HireKey on your team is a great advantage. And I've even had people pro bono come to me saying, I'm kind of stuck between jobs. And I think there was a woman who was a military woman, too. I remember that. I think I might have met her like in a coffee shop where I parked my bike to get a cup of coffee, and she started up chatting me up about the Raleigh that she hadn't seen for so long. And
what
anyway,
color
this goes
is
back.
It? Is it black?
It's right there. It's right around the corner. You'll see it in a second. But I said to her, you got to get connected with Andrew, because Andrew really knows everyone, and you kindly met her. And I think she's on to her next gig. So applause to her. So I'm Jack Russo. This is the Valley Current. I'm the managing partner of Computer Law Group. We're in Palo Alto and San Francisco. We're broadcasting from our radio booth in Palo Alto. I want to give applause to Loran, who's here, who's helping us do this. And we're going to set up a radio booth in San Francisco from all this additional equipment that we have. So you didn't know that, Loran, but I'm putting that in as another task to add to your list. So you can reach me at jrusso, JRUSSO, at computerlaw.com, and of course by phone as well at 650-327-9800. And of course the website is www.computerlaw.com. Thank you for listening.
Tune in next time on the Valley Current.